Welcome. I'm Rebecca Kinsey, a counseling psychologist based in Indiana. I've provided a recording of an online training I did with Geisinger, Commonwealth School of Medicine, about adapting to stress and building resilience. Throughout today's online class, so to speak, I'll be talking about stress, how to deal with stress and uncertainty, and how we can cope effectively with stress in order to build resiliency. It'll be a mixture of didactic, so talking about different research and skills, but then also there's some prompts throughout this that will allow you to really implement some of these skills that I'm talking about. The reason I like having that balance is because if I encourage you to practice these skills, the idea is that you might actually implement them once you're done listening to this recording. There is so much benefit to practicing deep breathing when you are stressed. And so I wanted to start off this online class by telling you how to breathe deep in order to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is that calming part of your nervous system. So I'll just guide you through for a couple of minutes. The thing to remember with deep breathing is that you want to breathe in through your nose, take a momentary pause, breathe out through your mouth, and then take another pause before that next in breath. Other thing that you want to be aware of is spending more time on your out breath than your in breath, and I'll guide you through this. So go ahead and sit in a comfortable position. I often encourage people to either lay down or sit with your feet flat on the ground rather than having your legs crossed. Just become aware of your body in this moment, noticing where your body is meeting perhaps the chair or the floor. And then go ahead and start to breathe in through your nose. Take a pause and slow exhale through your mouth. Another big inhale through your nose. Pause and breathe out through your mouth. Big breath in through your nose. Pause. Breathe out through your mouth. We'll just do a few more. Big breath in through your nose. Pause. Breathe out through your mouth. Breath in. Pause. Breath out. And last one, big breath in through your nose. Pause. Nice slow exhale. And research shows that if you can take 6 deep breaths, which depending on how deep you breathe, it only takes about 1 to 2 minutes, and it can have that nice calming effect. So it's really quite easy to incorporate breath work into your day-to-day when you think about it like that. Life is inevitably stressful. No surprise there. There is no way to get around the fact that life is stressful. Now, some situations are going to be more stressful than others, as you probably know. So I want to talk about the specific things that contribute to having a stronger stress response. So how stressful something is going to depend on how severe the stressor is. Finding out that you have strep throat is going to feel less stressful than finding out you have Crohn's disease, because Crohn's disease is arguably more severe than strep throat. It requires ongoing care compared to having strep and likely feeling better after a round of antibiotics. How chronic the stressor is will also impact how stressful it feels. So having a very busy semester with lots of assignments and responsibilities to fulfill is going to feel more stressful than a week with a lot going on, because the former is longer lasting. The timing of a stressor will impact how stressful it feels. Perhaps you've had the experience where you were already dealing with a lot and then another stressor gets added to your plate. Let's say you were stressed about a class, having a flare up with a chronic illness, had issues with your paycheck, and then you found out that your prescription that you need to manage your chronic illness is back ordered. That's bad timing because you're already in a bad space. This can also explain part of the reason why people are more emotionally reactive over something small when they've already been dealing with other stressors. The timing of that small stressor is poor and sets someone over the edge, so to speak. When a stressor closely affects your life, that will be more stressful. For example, if you're having a natural disaster happening within your community, that's going to be much more stressful compared to seeing a natural disaster happening across the country. How expected a stressor is will affect how stressful it feels. So for example, if you take an exam and you feel really terrible about your performance and you live it being like, I definitely failed that. When you actually get your exam back with a low grade, it probably won't be as stressful because you expected to get a low grade on it. On the other hand, if you suddenly have to deal with a change and you weren't expecting it, you may feel quite stressed. Lastly, how controllable the stressor is will influence how stressed you feel. This type of stressor tends to be the worst for us, so I'll spend a bit more time on it. People may stress about the economy, healthcare, politics, the climate, on top of their daily stressors of feeding themselves, keeping their home clean and organized, engaging in good hygiene, paying bills, so on and so forth. If you are stressed about something that is largely uncontrollable, that is going to feel more intense for you compared to dealing with something that is controllable. And if you ruminate on those stressors that are uncontrollable, it can lead to a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. If you find yourself stressing out about something, ask yourself, is this in or out of my control? And how much of it is in my control? When we take healthcare, for example, people can get very stressed about the state of our healthcare system. Are you going to be able to pay your medical bills? Are you going to be able to see your doctor in a reasonable time? Is your healthcare company going to approve the medication your doctor is prescribing? And it can go on and on. But how much of this is in your control? You can't control how many doctors are available. But what is in your control? Calling your doctor's office to see if there are cancellations, asking to see a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant instead of the doctor when those things are appropriate. When it comes to your healthcare costs, it is in your control to reach out to appropriate organizations to advocate for change. But besides that, much of this is out of your control. However, you want to use that stress in helpful ways. If you are stressed about medical costs, something that is in your control may be to make sure you are saving money for medical expenses, or asking for a payment plan if you get a bill that is too high for you to pay at that moment, or looking into how medical bills impact your credit score. We really want to be wise in our assessment of what is and is out of our control. If we get hooked to the things that are out of our control, it takes away energy we could use on the things that are in our control. We can also apply this to how we react to change. If there is some change to your environment and that change is out of your control, like perhaps you don't have much power in this situation to be able to do something differently, that is going to feel stressful. We want to find ways to be able to adapt to those stressors in our environments. So I wanted to share what we know about what leads to better or worse stress responses because I think it's helpful to be able to put those stressors within the context. So it can be helpful and validating to be able to say, oh yeah, this is making sense that I'm feeling stressed because this is such bad timing. This idea of being able to validate your emotional responses also goes into being emotionally intelligent, which I'll talk about later. Okay, so now that we've spent some time understanding why certain situations are stressful, I want to dive a bit deeper into what we can do to handle stressful situations. So just think to yourself, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of stress? Usually there is a negative connotation to stress. Understandably so, because there's a lot of research to support that when we experience stress, especially chronic stress, it can lead to too much cortisol, that leads to more inflammation, and that can lead to physical health problems. There's also something called the diathesis stress model, which has been supported in research. And this model states that people may have certain genetic predispositions for mental and physical health disorders, but they may not start to have symptoms until they experience some sort of stressor that activates those genes. So the takeaway is yes, feeling stress is linked with negative health outcomes. However, not all stress is bad, and our appraisal of that stress will determine how we react to the stress. I'll talk on the next slide from about a health psychologist who has done a lot of research on the appraisal of stress. I think her research is so fascinating, so we'll continue to unpack that. So Dr. McGonigal is a health psychologist, and she has found in her research that when people perceive their stress response as something positive, such as, this is my body preparing me for this task, their body stays calmer compared to when they interpret those sensations as, oh no, I'm feeling really stressed. And I think this research is absolutely fascinating because it speaks to the mind-body connection. We can calm our body by calming our minds, and calm our minds by calming our body. The thing I want you to remember from this is that the way we interpret those physical sensations in our bodies will influence how our nervous system actually responds. So Dr. McGonigal talks about this more in her book, The Upside of Stress. Highly recommend it. There's also on this page a link to YouTube where she talks about some of her research. But something that she talks about in The Upside of Stress is how we cognitively appraise the stressor will influence how our body experiences that stress. So let's take a couple of examples. An employee found out a project that they are working on is due 2 weeks earlier than what they thought, and they only have 1 day to finish it. They notice their heart starts to beat faster, they feel a pit in their stomach, and their chest tightens. Using this idea of healthy appraisal, the person might say, phew, my body is helping me stay alert and focused to dedicate time to this project. Another example, a medical student finds out that they got matched across the country away from their family and partner instead of the local program they hoped to get matched with. They initially notice this sense of defeat, there's a sense of anticipatory grief, and they think, dang, this really sucks. I hate moving, it's so expensive, I'm going to be further away from my family, and I have to do long distance with my partner. In this situation, the person is appraising the situation quite negatively, and that's going to lead them to feeling more stressed. However, they can appraise it differently by stating, you know what, I'm glad I got matched. This was a program that I was interested in, so it'll be nice to be a part of that training program. This gives me an opportunity to experience a new city and figure out what I like and dislike. So through that change to their appraisal, the stress response in their body will likely lessen. So also just giving you some time to think about this. So respond to the prompts on the screen, thinking about a recent time in which you felt stressed. How did you talk to yourself about that stress? What did you notice in your body? And based on what we just talked about, how could you talk to yourself in a way that helps you cope with stress better? I could honestly spend hours talking about ways to deal with uncertainty. So I'm just going to give you some options. I have my own private practice and I work with a lot of individuals that deal with anxiety. And anxiety tends to rear its ugly little head when people are concerned about something happening in the future. Because the future is uncertain, they feel anxious. As cool as it would be to be able to see into the future, we can't. So we have to find ways to deal with uncertainty. As basic as this sounds, one of the best things you can do for dealing with uncertainty is radically accepting that you cannot predict the future. Even though you might know you can't predict the future, oftentimes people get hooked into this idea of planning for the future or doing things in order to guarantee they will get the outcome that they want. So for example, someone says, okay, if I work really hard in school and do all the extracurriculars, I'll get into the school that I want. It is possible that the person who works really hard and has a really impressive resume is competitive enough to get into the school they want, and you could argue they're probably going to have a higher chance of getting into a competitive school compared to the person who just tries to pass classes and doesn't really engage in any sort of extracurriculars. However, it is not guaranteed. In other words, it is uncertain. They do not know that they will get into their top school with 100% certainty if they do all of these things. The reality is, no matter how hard you try to control the future is uncontrollable. So radical acceptance would sound like, I know I can't predict the future, and I'm going to stay focused on the present. Or, I don't have to like what happens, but I can accept that it is what it is. If you're spending too much time thinking about the future and it's really not helping you move your life in the direction you want it to go, you want to challenge that way of thinking by being mindful. And mindfulness is just simply being present, non-judgmental, and accepting. A way to bring yourself back into the present is to practice grounding by focusing on your senses and what you are taking in the moment. For example, if you find yourself worrying about something as you walk between classes, walk between meetings, challenge yourself to notice your surroundings. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Can you taste anything? Can you touch something? You can also be curious about what you're noticing. So for example, I wonder how many different trees are on campus, or what colors are on this building. So you're using your senses in the present to keep you in the moment. Your body is in the present, so your mind should be too. I also want to reiterate what I had mentioned earlier. When you are in these sort of situations where you're trying to control a lot in order to get the outcome you want, take a step back and honestly ask yourself, how much of this is in my control? How much can I realistically do without sacrificing my health? Because just because something is in your control doesn't mean you have the time to do it all, because time isn't in your control. You may be able to do more. You could study for more hours. You could edit and re-edit papers. You could do more extracurriculars, but at what cost? Does doing those things start to impact how much you can sleep, for example? Does it start to impact how much you get to spend with the people you care about? Does doing all those things leave you so stressed that it feels like the only way to cope is to numb out through drugs or alcohol? If you do all these things, do you feel so irritable you don't want to be around others? If those are the consequences of trying to control so much, you want to do things differently. Do not overextend yourself in the hopes that if you do all the things, you'll finally get rewarded with your ideal life. You might not get that ideal life. However, if you don't feel good pretty consistently or aren't able to do the other things in your life that are important to you, you want to acknowledge those feelings and actions and do something different. And that might mean saying no and taking time to also care for yourself in meaningful ways. So let's say that you were trying to make a decision, and making that decision is very hard because you don't know what the outcomes of that decision are going to be. This is a difficult dilemma that all of us will face. So how can you make a decision that you won't regret later? You let your values lead you. Now, I can't say that this will work 100% of the time, but I can say that when people allow their values to guide them in their decision making, they tend to be more accepting of the outcomes and find more meaning in their experiences. So values are the beliefs you have about yourself, others, or the world that motivate you into action and help you make sense of your experiences. It can be incredibly helpful to be able to clarify your values. And at the end of this presentation, I'll put a link for a list of values. If you're interested in clarifying your values, you can go through the list and ask yourself which ones are very important, or not important. You also want to think about what values are important in different areas of your life, such as your relationships, your personal growth and health, your work and education, or your leisure time. You can also ask yourself, who do you look up to? Why do you look up to them? This may indicate what you value. One of my favorite mentors is my favorite because she's incredibly genuine. It makes sense that I like her and I respect her a lot because I also really value being genuine. Alternatively, you can ask yourself, who are the people you have conflict with? Or who are the people you don't particularly like or want to be around? You can ask yourself, what situations make you upset or angry? Recognizing what you don't like can indicate that what you value, because we often have negative feelings and attitudes towards people or situations that go against what we value. So for example, do you hate working alone? Perhaps that indicates valuing teamwork. Does it really bother you when people are judgmental towards others? That might mean you really value compassion. And once you have a better idea of what your values are in the different domains of your life, that can help you make a decision in that area. For example, let's say that you were faced with a dilemma in which you are happily living in Pennsylvania and your partner of 1 year just got a job in Kansas and they want you to move with them. There are a lot of characteristics in your relationship that you value. Your partner is kind, they have good communication skills, they're patient, they're ambitious. Your life in Pennsylvania is also pretty solid. When it comes to your leisure time, you're able to do a lot of those things in Pennsylvania because you live in a very walkable neighborhood, so you can watch the park, you can ride your bike, and you love being able to explore new restaurants and museums. In Pennsylvania, you're also close to your family, your friends who you've been friends with for years all live nearby. And let's say you're in a pretty populated area, so when you've dated, you've had a big dating pool. Lastly, when it comes to your personal growth and health, in Pennsylvania, you value that you have a medical care team you really like, there's a sense of community in your neighborhood, there are lots of opportunities to get connected in organizations that you care about, and you have a great support system. Let's say you also love your job and you know that there is a lot of upward mobility. If you stay there, you're going to get promotions, you're going to be able to get to this place where maybe you really want to be, and you're getting compensated well. So what we see here is that there are a lot of values that are aligned with someone's life in Pennsylvania. There are also values that are aligned with what they look for in a partner. There is uncertainty about what could happen depending on the person's decision, because if they move to Kansas with their partner, they may regret moving. If they stay in Pennsylvania, they may regret having to be long distance or having to break up with their partner. However, their values can help guide their decision. In this case, the person is able to live out a lot of their values in terms of their relationships, their leisure time, their career, and their health by living in Pennsylvania. If they were to move to Kansas, they are prioritizing their relationship over other areas of their life. They might lose a lot of what they value by moving away. It is not that they couldn't also create a valuable life in Kansas, but it takes time. The person might realize they're going to prioritize these 3 areas of their life, so personal growth and health, the work and education, the leisure, because they're really important to them and they can deal with the loss of their partner. Now, there is no right or wrong way to do this, and it's going to be dependent upon what you are prioritizing in your life at that time. Perhaps this person doesn't really value having a long-term partner and knows they're going to be able to date someone else in the future if they want companionship. But in another situation, someone else might prioritize things differently. Either way is fine, but the point is to be able to reflect upon the values, which situation allows you to live out your values in the way that is most meaningful to you, and then going with that decision. Then, when you look back at that decision, you can say wisely, I made the decision based on the information I had in the moment and with what was most important to me at the time. Another way to deal with uncertainty is learning to trust yourself to cope with difficult emotions. So in thinking about how much you trust yourself to deal with difficult emotions, you want to think about how well you understand and regulate emotions. So emotional intelligence is the idea that you know how to monitor and label your emotions, and you use those emotions to inform how you think and behave. And being able to regulate your emotions is a part of being emotionally intelligent. Regulating emotions is knowing when you sense a feeling, what that feeling is indicating to you in terms of your needs, and doing something to get those needs met. I could spend a lot of time on this, but I'm just going to give you the basics for now. Over time, as you learn how to label, validate, understand, and manage your emotions, you're also going to learn to trust yourself to get through the emotionally challenging times. This might mean that you have enough self-awareness to pick up on when you are feeling sad or mad or anxious or happy. You can also understand what is triggering those feelings and respond to yourself with something like, yeah, that makes sense that I'm feeling this way. Then, based on those feelings, you know what you can do to help regulate them. So, for example, if you feel sad and that sadness is trying to tell you that you feel lonely, then you know the unmet need is social connection. Therefore, seeking out social support would help regulate the sadness. Alternatively, if you feel happy, it's helpful to know what triggers your happiness. Perhaps when you are sad, you can try to do something to make you happy as a way to lessen the feelings of sadness. Emotional intelligence also means that you know when to be flexible and that you have multiple tools in your toolbox to manage your emotions. Perhaps there are times in which you feel anxious and you need to use that anxiety to energize you to focus on the things that are in your control. Or other times you may feel anxious and you understand that anxiety is telling you you haven't had enough time to relax, so you want to take the time to relax. There's a term called self-efficacy, which is defined by Bandura, who's a researcher in this area, as people's beliefs in their capabilities to produce desired effects by their own actions. Basically, do people believe that they are capable of achieving the outcomes they set for themselves? Self-efficacy is linked with psychological adjustment, and that people who have high self-efficacy are generally able to deal with challenges well and have lower rates of depression and anxiety. People can also believe they are self-efficacious when it comes to regulating their emotions. So to think about that previous example again, if you've had the experience of dealing with the ending of a relationship, then you can tell yourself, I've been through this before and I got through it, so I'd be able to get through this experience too. This goes into having a sense of resilience, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We can tie self-efficacy into the example of having to make a difficult decision. If the outcome someone is seeking is being able to adjust to a relationship ending, an adjustment would look like them being able to move on with and enjoy their life. Someone who believes they will be able to achieve that outcome is going to fare better compared to someone who thinks, this is going to make me so sad and I'm not going to be able to get through it. So how can you increase your sense of self-efficacy? By asking yourself some of these questions. So how were you successful in similar situations? So if you've gone through a breakup, or if you've had to go through a job change, or if you had to go through health issues, how were you successful in other situations where you had to deal with that? If you struggled in similar situations, what can you learn from that situation? So let's say that you had a job change or you had a breakup and that really, really hurt you. You want to think about, okay, I know that was really painful, but what can I learn from that situation? You can also ask yourself, how have other people acted in similar situations? So looking to your friends or looking to your family, looking to, role models, even things that you see on media. Being curious about how are they acting in situations that feel similar to you. So how are they acting when they have to deal with a breakup? How are they acting when they're faced with a health issue? Or how are they acting when they're faced with a dilemma about what they do with their career? So you can model what you're seeing in there, especially when they're healthy behaviors. Can you imagine yourself behaving effectively? So can you imagine taking care of yourself after a breakup? Can you imagine building your life in a new area? And your reaction to that can inform your decision. Also ask yourself, do you notice yourself getting tense or feeling heavy, but still feeling hopeful or confident? And this one's a little bit harder to apply to the breakup situation, but you can look at it from the perspective of, oh, I'm noticing myself getting tense thinking about this breakup. And I also feel confident in being able to grieve it. Or I feel so heavy thinking about this potential loss, but I feel hopeful in being able to build up my life again in the future. And then lastly, can others encourage you? Social support is key. So if you want, you can think about a time that you were challenged or you were facing a difficult decision, and then answer these questions. So, for example, if you're trying to implement an exercise routine and figuring out how and when to do it, how could you answer these questions? Focusing on making the quote unquote right decision becomes less pressured when you can make a value directed decision because you know your values and what you're prioritizing. And when you trust yourself, in other words, when you have self-efficacy, that you would be able to handle difficult emotions that come out of that decision. The last topic I'll cover today is how this all ties into resilience. Resilience is generally seen as an ability to bounce back from adversity. In other words, when someone experiences something difficult, they are able to get back to their normal baseline once they've gone through that situation. We also sometimes see that after a difficult situation, people start functioning even better, and this could be because they go through that experience, perhaps increase their sense of self-efficacy, and were able to find meaning in that difficult experience to the point where it changes their perspective on life moving forward. As I've alluded to throughout this presentation, when people go through stressful and difficult times, they may have some negative emotional or behavioral reaction. So perhaps they feel stress or other negative emotions, maybe they engage in unhealthy behaviors, or they aren't able to do the activities they typically enjoy doing. What we want to see happen is that once that stressful event is over, they go back to quote unquote normal, and that they have a balance of negative and positive emotions, and they are engaging in pleasurable and meaningful activities. Hopefully you've had this experience in which you might have had a week or even a season of life that is quite challenging. Maybe you don't feel like yourself. You feel a little cranky or sad, or you withdraw from your friends, and so on. But eventually you get back to normal. And this is resilience. Every time you go through something difficult and you make it to the other side, you are building your resilience. You can build your resilience by making meaning from difficult experiences. So, for example, you can ask yourself, how did this experience help me live out my values? What did this experience tell me about what I value or need to prioritize? What did I learn about myself, other people, or the world from this experience? What skills or strengths did I use? What am I grateful for or proud of as a result of this experience? You can also really hype yourself up and give you a better sense of resilience by taking some time to reflect upon that stressful time. So you can ask yourself, what helped me get through this? How did I care for myself? What sorts of activities was I doing? What things were I telling myself? Who supported me through this? What did I learn from this? All of these reflections can help bring more awareness into the thoughts, feelings, and actions that contribute to your resilience. Typically, setting aside time to engage in activities that bring you a sense of happiness or relieve stress are going to be helpful. Telling yourself, I can get through this. This isn't going to last forever. Or even, I'm going to accept that this is a challenging time, can all be helpful statements to tell yourself. When we look at people who are able to be resilient, one of the contributing factors is social support. Therefore, when you are struggling, find people who you can lean on. And these may be people you go to give you specific advice on the situation. It can be people you go to for emotional support through the situation, or people you go to get your mind off the situation and doing something more enjoyable. Social support is key. Lastly, I want to mention the Penn Resiliency Program. This program was a program that was first developed for the U.S. Army and was found to be effective at increasing resilience, improving mental health symptoms, and improving overall well-being, among other things. The full extent of the program goes beyond what I can cover today. However, I wanted to provide you with an overview of the program and the specific skills that they teach. Regardless of not being able to go into the full details of the program, you can still learn what factors contribute to resilience. So you can be more intentional about doing those skills in the future. So, self awareness is the ability to pay attention to your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and physiological reactions. Self regulation is the ability to change one's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and physiology in the service of a desired outcome. And self regulation and self awareness are tied into what we discussed about emotional intelligence and emotional regulation. Mental agility is the ability to look at situations from multiple perspectives and to think creatively and flexibly. We touched on this with the idea of how we understand and appraise stress based on the Dr. McGonigal research. Strengths of character is the ability to use one's strengths to engage authentically, overcome challenges, and create a life aligned with one's values. We explored this when it came to understanding values and guiding behaviors and decision making. Connection is the ability to build and maintain strong, trusting relationships. I just mentioned this in terms of social support and how important social support is. And then optimism is the ability to notice and expect the positive, to focus on what you can control, and to take purposeful action. Although we didn't discuss ways to increase optimism, we did discuss skills related to optimism, including understanding that you can control, understanding what you can control and being intentional about doing those things. Values also connect to this, because when you know your value and take purposeful actions to live congruently with those values, it can lead to being more optimistic. So to wrap things up, I did want to put a couple of links here for additional resources. You can scan the QR code and that'll show you the different resources, or you can just follow those links. Brene Brown's link is the list of values that I had mentioned. The Feelings Wheel is a great resource for getting a better idea of what emotion you are feeling and actually labeling that. How to Make Stress Your Friend is the YouTube video and TED Talk from Dr. Kelly McGonigal that I referenced. I also recommend her book, The Upside of Stress. She has a couple of others, but The Upside of Stress is very relevant to what we talked about today. The Greater Good Science Center is just a wonderful, wonderful resource in terms of understanding different ways to build skills and create more meaning and satisfaction within life. They have a bunch of articles about some of these things that we talked about, along with so many other topics. They have quizzes that you can take. They have a podcast that's linked on their website, different activities that you can do. So really, really, really great website. And then I also have my journal that is linked here. It is a guided journal that prompts you to do different reflections, practice different activities. And then within that journal, there are also QR codes. Obviously, I love QR codes that you can scan and get additional information about some of these things. So it might lead you to a website or to a video because you're really wanting to learn more. I hope that this was helpful for you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.